So every year, it's the same deal, right? You get a text from one friend that says, Ramadan Mubarak, we're starting tomorrow. But then you hear from your family across town, and they're starting the day after. How is it possible that even in the same city, people can't agree? Well, the answer is this incredible mix of hardcore science and ancient tradition. So let's jump in and solve this moon sighting puzzle once and for all.
This really is the big question, isn't it? It seems like it should be so simple, but what's really going on here is a fascinating intersection of faith, astronomy, and history. We're going to unravel this whole mystery together, and it all starts with one simple, ancient rule.
So where does all this come from? Well, believe it or not, this entire global conversation, year after year, boils down to one surprisingly straightforward instruction. And this is it. This is the core instruction. The tradition isn't based on some abstract calculation or a pre-printed calendar date. No, it's rooted in a physical, human act of observation, of actually going outside and seeing the new moon with your own eyes. And this act, it has a name, ru'ya. And this is so important to get. It's all about the sighting. It's not about the moment the new moon is born astronomically. It's about the moment we, as people on Earth, can actually see that first sliver of light. That distinction is the key to this entire puzzle. Now, the rule might be simple, just see it. But the science of actually being able to see that tiny crescent moon, well, that's way more complex than you think. Just because the moon is up there doesn't mean it's visible. Okay, so first things first, we've got to understand the difference between these two things. On one hand, you have the astronomical new moon. Think of this as the moon's moment of birth. It's in perfect alignment with the sun, so it's completely invisible to us. But what we're actually looking for is the Hilal, the visible crescent. That only happens after the moon has moved far enough away from the sun's glare to catch a bit of sunlight and reflect it back to us. So how does it go from invisible to visible? It's a journey, really. It starts with conjunction, that's the invisible birth. Then, as it orbits, it starts to separate from the sun. This creates an angle between them, which astronomers call elongation. And only when that angle gets big enough does the crescent finally become bright enough for us to spot it in the twilight sky. And that angle is a really big deal. In fact, there's a hard scientific limit known as the Donjan limit, and that number is about 7.5 degrees. What that means is it's physically impossible to see the crescent if that angle is less than 7.5 degrees, period. Not with your eyes, not even with a telescope. It's a cosmic red line that has to be crossed. And this is where geography crashes the party. The possibility of seeing the moon isn't the same for everyone on the same night. It actually moves across a spinning globe like a wave. This is why someone in, say, South America or Africa often has a much better chance of seeing the crescent a full day before someone in Asia. It's all about timing. They've had more hours for that all-important angle to grow. So we've got the science down. Seems straightforward enough, right? Well, not so fast, because the science is only one piece of the puzzle. At the very heart of why you and your neighbor might start fasting on different days is a legal debate that's been going on for centuries. And this debate really comes down to two main schools of thought. The first one is Ittihad al-Matali, which basically means unity of horizons. The idea here is that if a credible sighting happens anywhere in the world, that's it. Ramadan starts for all Muslims everywhere, global sighting. The other is Ikhtilaf al-Matali, or difference of horizons. This one argues that each community, each region is bound by its own local sighting. Now, the main evidence for this local sighting approach comes from a really famous story from early Islamic history. A man named Quraib traveled from Syria to Medina. He told the leader there, Ibn Abbas, that they had seen the crescent back in Syria on a Friday. But Ibn Abbas said that in Medina, they had seen it on Saturday, and they were going to stick with their own local sighting. When Quraib asked why, Ibn Abbas gave this simple, powerful answer. This is how the messenger of Allah has commanded us. He prioritized what was seen locally. And that story gives us this really important concept called a mutla. So what is it? Think of it as a sighting zone. It's not about political borders or country lines. It's a geographical area where the probability of seeing the new moon is more or less the same for everyone inside it. It's the practical application of that local sighting idea. Okay, so all of this brings us right into the modern day. You know, we live in an age of satellites and supercomputers, which obviously leads to a pretty big question. Why on earth are we still standing in fields and on rooftops looking at the sky?
I mean, this is the question on everyone's mind, right? If we can predict a solar eclipse down to the millisecond 100 years from now, why can't we just, run a program and get a single unified start date for Ramadan for the whole world? Well, it's not quite that simple.
To understand why, you have to look at the wisdom behind the original instruction. This saying points to the beautiful accessibility of the method. The Prophet established a system that anyone, anywhere, could use. A farmer, a merchant, a scholar. It didn't depend on complex charts or specialized knowledge. It was a profoundly simple and universal system. Now, that doesn't mean calculation has no role today. It has a huge role, but it's a very specific and nuanced one. You have to understand the difference between what's called hisab qat'i, or definitive calculation, and hisab zanni, predictive calculation. Definitive calculation can tell us what is absolutely impossible. So if someone claims they saw the moon before it was even astronomically born, science can say, sorry, that's impossible. But predictive calculation can only tell us what is likely to be seen. It's a guide for observers, not a substitute for them. And this gets to the core belief for a huge portion of the Muslim world. The principle is clear. Technology is an amazing servant, but it's not the master. Calculations are an invaluable tool. They help us rule out errors, they guide us on where and when to look, but they do not replace that foundational required act of ru'ya, the actual physical sighting. So let's put all the pieces back together. The puzzle of why we all start on different days is really solved by these three key factors. First, you've got simple astronomy and geography. The moon just isn't visible everywhere at once. Second, you have that deep legal interpretation, the global versus local debate. And third, you have differences in methodology. How much weight different groups give to modern calculation versus that traditional naked eye sighting. And this leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We often frame these different start dates as a problem, a sign of disunity. But what if it isn't? What if this diversity is actually a sign of a vibrant, living tradition, one that's still grappling with the realities of our planet, the advancements of science, and the richness of its own history? Maybe unity doesn't require everyone to be perfectly uniform. That's something to think about.